All right, welcome back to Matty Ice Investing, your home for investing, education, and entertainment. Before we begin, please understand a quick disclaimer here. So, this content is just for educational and entertainment purposes only. I'm in no way a financial advisor. If you are looking to make a financial decision, please contact a registered financial advisor that can help you in your area. All right, with that said, let's jump into how do I know when to sell a stock? I think a lot of people have asked this question. For me personally, I know selling a stock is probably one of the harder things to do. I usually tend to buy and hold quite a bit, but selling is definitely not my favorite time and not my preferred time. But there's always some times that there are need to sell. All right, so for me, there's 6 times that you're going to think about selling. We're just going to cover them off here quickly and jump into a little bit more in depth here in just a moment. So the first one is when you're locking in gains or stopping losses. This is a pretty important one to understand. If you have reached some of the gains you've identified in your goal there and you want to lock those in or take your losses, this is probably the most important one to understand. The second one is when you hit your goal. So that's sort of in line with gains, but there's a bit of difference there. So I do want to speak a bit more about the detail and the nuance with that one. The third one I always consider is when your financial needs have changed. And that can happen quite a bit sometimes for folks. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Number four is when your thesis or the company has changed. This can be another important one that you want to understand as well. The fifth one is when you want to take back your original strategy. This is something I know I've used a number of times. I think it's quite a valuable thing to think about. So we'll mention that in a moment. And then last but not least is when there's a better option where you want to rebalance your portfolio. So lots of stuff to get into, and let's jump into the first one now. All right. So when you're looking at locking in gains or stopping losses, a couple of things to consider there. So you're always going to have either gains or losses. Ideally, you have more gains than losses. That's kind of the hope there. But it's never a bad thing to lock in those gains because everything is unrealized until you've actually locked it in. So your stock may have doubled or tripled or 10x or who knows what, but none of that matters until you actually lock in those gains because obviously the market's volatile. And until you've locked them in, nothing is official. Similar with losses, they're unrealized losses until you actually cash out. And so for me, I always want to think about, what are the gains? Have I reached the numbers I'm trying to achieve? Is that the time to cash out and take that win? Or on the flip side, have I lost more than I wanted to? And so I've put in some stop loss measures in there to make sure that I'm not going to be losing more than I want to. So for me, a good rule to remember is Warren Buffett's 2 rules. Rule number one is never lose money. And rule two is never forget rule number one. And so, you're not going to guarantee that you're going to never lose money, but that is the goal. And so, having stop losses for your accounts and your investments is a great idea to make sure that they don't get too hurt. And then also making sure that you sell it at the right time, obviously, is another key piece. The next reason to sell, I think, is when you hit that goal. And so we talked about in a previous video about setting a goal and what is the plan for that. And being disciplined to pull out your money at that time, I think is a challenge for some, but is a very smart decision if you can do it. I think you want to make sure you've got clarity around what that goal is. So once you achieve it, you pull it out, you're happy with that result, and then try not to look back on what could have been because you've reached your goal, you've achieved it, and now it's time to set the next goal. The real trick with this one is obviously try not to get greedy. You don't want to hit that goal and then stick around longer just trying to get some additional benefit out of it. Set those goals and be rigid with when you achieve them and when you need to make those sales. The next one is when financial needs have changed. And so for me personally, I know my financial needs have changed. It's, whether you're getting married and having kids, changing jobs, if you lose your job, if you fall into some health issues, you want to make sure that, your finances are meeting your current needs. And sometimes those needs can change and can change quickly. So, I always kind of like this quote from Mike Tyson that says, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth or the face. I'm a big believer that that's the way it is. And so it's good to have that plan, but good to also be ready to make those changes if and when necessary. And so when you're making those financial decisions, you want to know, do I need this money for the short term, the long term? This ties back to the goals, but sometimes your needs are going to change and you're just going to have to make that sale regardless. Number four is when the thesis or the company changes. So, again, another quote I kind of like here: "The only constant in life is change." I think anybody who's had some life experience would say that's probably pretty true. There is constant change throughout our lives, and we need to be ready for that. And similarly, companies change. So it could be that the company has decided to enter into, a new market that you may not necessarily agree with, or you don't think is the right move for them. It could be that the company's been bought out or merged with another company. It could be that the company's deciding to change whether they're paying dividends as much or cutting them back. We've seen some of that in 25. Some longstanding dividend payers have decided to cut back their dividends, and as a result, that might change your thesis on the company and what you believe in. And so nothing wrong with making a change at that point. Again, nothing says you have to sell everything you have. You could sell, partial positions, and we'll talk about that here in just a moment. But you should really be thinking about, what is the thesis of this company, and has that changed from my original plans? It could also change in wanting to buy more, but it could also change in wanting to sell off some of that as well. All right, the next one I want you to think about is this strategy called the take back original strategy. And so for me, I've had an opportunity to deploy this strategy a number of times, and I'll walk you through quickly what that looks like. So imagine you invest your $100. You've worked hard to gain that, and you want to put it to work. And the good news for you is that it is actually appreciated. So it's tripled up there. So now you've got $300 for your $100 that you've invested. So kudos to you. You've made a good chunk of money. And now you're trying to figure out what to do with it. And a strategy I really like is this. So you keep some of the profits invested, and let those continue to grow because you think the company's still got some growth opportunity in front of it. But then you also take out your original investment, and you can use that to redeploy into another investment. You can use that to just sit in cash until you find the right next opportunity there. But the reason I really like this strategy is because it allows you to just play with the profits. So even if you were to go down and lose everything, go down to zero, you still break even. You haven't fallen behind. Ideally, that wouldn't happen and it would continue to grow, but it gives you a lot more peace of mind and reduces a bit more of the risk by being able to pull out the original. And again, you might think that this is tough to achieve, but if you make some good decisions on your investments, it's actually very realistic. And it's also an opportunity where you can look at, maybe pulling out a partial position on things as well. So encourage you to think about this, take back the original strategy. And last but not least, I thought it'd be fun to sort of throw this image in here. If a better option or a need to rebalance your portfolio comes along, for me, I rarely will sell a stock unless it really either hits my goal and I want to lock in some of those gains, unless something else changes, or if I see a better option out there. I think that's the other one that really attracts me. And I think one of the things you've got to consider when you're investing is, if a stock is maybe underperformed or hasn't done as well as you had hoped, maybe you're looking at, okay, where else could I go? But I don't want to lock in that loss. Sometimes locking in those losses for a better option is a good way to go. Again, not financial advice, and certainly not marriage or relationship advice either, but sometimes that new stock might be a great addition to your portfolio, and that underperforming one needs to go. So just a reminder, again, these are the 6 times that I would say you should consider selling. So again, if you're going to lock in those gains or stop those losses, if you've hit your goal, if you've got that financial need has changed, if the organization has changed or the thesis has changed, or if you want to take back the original strategy, again, highly recommend that. And then if a better option comes along or you need to rebalance your portfolio. But I guess secret number 7 is sometimes it's best to just hold. I'm a big fan of holding on to stocks for the long term. I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think they're great assets to have in your portfolio. And sometimes, folks have sold things a bit too early. I know for myself, I've been a long time holder of NVIDIA, and one of the times I was looking at selling them, they kind of flatlined for a while and wasn't seeing as much growth, and was seriously considering selling a portion or even all of my holdings in them. And instead decided to just wait and see if they would sort of rebound a bit more. And lo and behold, all this data center growth really started to pick up, and certainly very fortunate that I held on to my holdings there, because I think there's been a lot of value in that. So again, sometimes it's best to just hold and see where things go, because the best holdings I have are some of the ones I've had for the longest time there. Just give them that time to grow. Again, thank you very much for tuning in today. Appreciate you listening to me, and look forward to talking again in the future. Thanks. Bye.